Hello, everybody. My name is Aleksandra Kuczyńska-Zonik, and I represent the Institute of Central Europe. It is my pleasure to start to moderate together with Peteris Timofejevs webinar titled "From the Soviet Union to New Forms of Cooperation in the Baltic Sea Region." But before we start, I would like to say some words about the issue of yearbook of the Institute of East Central Europe. This issue will be devoted to the Baltic Sea region as well. And I would like to encourage you to look at this book. It will be published within a few weeks, so I think that you could find it online, or it will be published online or in paper version. It is worth seeing because we collect several valuable papers devoted to the Baltic Sea region. There are some of them which cover the general topics of politics, economy, and cooperation within the region. Additionally, there are some works connected with particular topics such as minority rights or climate policy or youth policy. And finally, you can find articles devoted to memory politics and others. So to summarize, I feel that you would be very interested in that work, and I recommend to see it. And now I would like to maybe Peteris will continue.
Indeed, thank you very much, Alexandra. My name is Peteris. I'm a senior lecturer at Umeå University at the Department of Political Science. And my contribution will be here as that of a moderator, and I shall start with introducing our panelists, our speakers. So let me begin the introduction with Aleksandra Borowicz, who is an economist at the University of Gdańsk. Aleksandra's scientific work focuses on the European Union, trade, foreign direct investment, and cross-border cooperation, among other things. And she has published several articles in such academic journals as Transnational Corporations Review, European Integration Studies, and Studies in European Affairs. And she also serves as the board member of the Polish Association for European Community Research, PESCA. Welcome, Aleksandra. The next panelist is Dr. Damian Szacawa, who is assistant professor at the Department of International Relations at Curie-Skłodowska University in Lublin, and senior analyst at the Baltic Department of the Institute of Central Europe. Among Damian's research interests are the international institutions in the Baltic Sea region, especially Council of Baltic Sea States, and the security in the Baltic Sea region after the Cold War. And he has most recently co-authored a book on climate policies of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So we are welcoming Damian to this panel too. And finally, let me introduce Louis John Wierenga, who is Junior Research Fellow at Johan Skytte Institute of Political Studies, University of Tartu in Estonia, and a lecturer in international relations at the Baltic Defense College. His research interests include populist radical right parties in the Baltic Sea region, the foreign policy ideas of these parties, their activity on social media platforms such as Twitter, about which he has published in academic journals. And of course, he is also looking at the youth organizations of such parties, as well as their transnational cooperation. Welcome, Louis. Well, I will proceed with introducing also the topic of this event, and then I thought that I will also pass the word to the speakers after that. And the topic of today is from Soviet Union to new forms of cooperation. And if we look back 30 years ago, when the then superpower Soviet Union collapsed, from this vantage point, if we look back to this event, it is clear that the Baltic Sea region has not become a buffer zone between the West and Russia, as it was feared once in a time. It has neither become a region of some kind of regional power vacuum onto which various power players can project their geopolitical visions and in which the same players can realize their wildest geopolitical ambitions and adventures. Instead, we have seen a reemergence of sovereign nation states that to varying degree have made an effort to cooperate with each other. And our guests here in this panel are very qualified, actually, as I mentioned before, to speak about such establishment of new forms of cooperations. We have seen not only emergence of new forms of cooperation, we have also seen expansion of existing cooperation, such as, for instance, expansion of NATO, a traditional political and military alliance. And we have also seen enlargement of the European Union, a major global trade bloc, which has, of course, evolved into something much more than just trade bloc in the last 30 years. And we see also that this region opened up a huge variety of bilateral cooperation too. And among them, among such notable examples of bilateral cooperation is economic cooperation between 3 Baltic states and Poland. And on this topic, I'm really looking to discuss these matters with Dr. Aleksandra Borowicz. And on the other side, of course, there have been quite a proliferation of different new regional institutions which focus on cooperation in such fields as soft security, such as environmental security, for instance, HELCOM. And there are also other bodies, institutions that focus on broader scale, different kind of issue cooperation, such as Council of the Baltic Sea States. And to some extent, these institutions have been used as another venue for cooperation and dialogue when the countries whose behavior in the international community has raised some concerns, such as Russia. This Council of the Baltic Sea States have been then the place where you can meet the representatives of Russia and try to work on still some matters some problems that can be shared, that are shared. And there is even a contribution to the yearbook, which examines the ways how Russia has tried to use the Council of the Baltic Sea States as a venue for trying to restore some level of trust. I'm looking forward to hear from Dr. Szacawa whether he would agree with such an assessment. And I'm looking forward to discuss this proliferation of various international institutions and the role of these institutions in the Baltic Sea region with him, with Dr. Szacawa. And finally, we have also seen quite a proliferation of interactions at the level of civil society, for instance, political parties who have become transnational players in transnational cooperation. And some of them have come up with various ideas of how the future cooperation between states should look like. And one such idea that has caught the eye of many scholars interested in radical right parties is the idea of intermodium, which has its origins actually in the interwar period in Poland. But of course, these parties have taken this idea in a slightly different, if you like, in a slightly different direction. And one of the persons who have looked at this is, of course, our guest Louis Wierenga, who has studied both these interactions at the grassroots level between the parties, and who has studied also these ideological visions of these parties. So, having said that, I would really like to start maybe then to ask some questions to our guests and ask to our contributors in this panel. And I think that maybe we could turn to Dr. Szacawa and Damian, what would be your assessment of these last 30 years, where we stand at the moment? Has this proliferation of various institutions in the Baltic Sea region contributed anything to building trust, promoting cooperation and security in the region?
Thanks, Peteris. I'd like to ask firstly, how much time do I have? How much time?
I think that's up to 10 minutes, but it depends on you. So I don't feel that I will interrupt you. So present your points of view.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Aleksandra. Thanks, Timofejevs, Mr. Timofejev, and thank you firstly for introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's a great honor to me. And the question about cooperation between states after the Soviet Union collapsed. Well, it's a huge history. Maybe I should start from that during the Cold War, the Baltic Sea region was characterized by transparency and clarity, which were also main features of the international order in the Euro-Atlantic area. This international order was, well, of course, bipolar international world order, and it was bipolarity, especially on a military, political, and ideological planes. At the level of institutional ties, there were a clear division into firstly the NATO states, then the European Economic Community and the Council of Europe, secondly the Warsaw Pact and Comecon states, and thirdly, neutral states. And I think that there is no enough time to go into details regarding the two-block system, but I want to emphasize two things. Firstly, in my opinion, the presence of neutral states in the region, along with the security policy pursued by Nordic states, meant that the degree of inter-block tensions in the Baltic Sea region during the Cold War was relatively low compared to continental Europe. And secondly, from the 1970s, the states located in the Baltic Sea region began cooperation between two blocks within the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe. We remember, at least from books, I guess, that it was 1975 and when the final act of the Conference of Security and Cooperation in Europe was adopted. And this final act was particularly important for the cooperation let's say at the last decades during the Cold War and at the beginning of 1990s, because the final act of the CSCE grouped the areas of interest of all countries in the so-called four baskets. So we have firstly, of course, European security issues. Secondly, it was cooperation in the field of economy, science, and technology, as well as environmental protection. Thirdly, cooperation in humanitarian and related matters. And the last basket was were issues related to continuation of the conference process. And now I'd like to focus on three areas of cooperation, namely security, environmental protection, and transformation. So I perceive and I see that one of the main aim of cooperation in the Baltic Sea region after the collapse of the Soviet Union was building stability and security in the region. And you mentioned in your introduction that there was a fear that there will be some kind of buffer zone between different powers. There was a fear about so-called gray zone of security, generally which was related to the whole region of Central Europe. But I think that it was also obvious that the transformation of the Cold War European security architecture made it necessary to build a new security architecture better suited to wider Europe. And this is, of course, enlargement of NATO, EU enlargement, both processes which were finished in 2004 in the so-called dual enlargement, big enlargement, were obvious. I don't remember these years to a huge extent because I am relatively young, but I read and heard a lot about the euphoria caused by the end of history, and my interviewers, people involved in the decision-making, said that there were a feeling that the common European institutions should govern the common European home. I think that it should be emphasized that this goal related to security was characteristic of the majority of international organizations that were created to counteract violent and non-linear changes of the international environment. Stabilization of the Baltic Sea region was at that time a central issue for all littoral states. I think that stabilizing the international environment means something which is related to its greater predictability, which in turn creates the premises for optimizing the decisions and action of states. And in this way, the idea behind the Council of the Baltic Sea States, the CBSS, could be reduced to the, let's say, canons of liberal thought in the international relations theory. Stability understood in this way was an inseparable element of international security, which was entering a new stage defined by the ministers in the introduction to the Copenhagen Declaration in March 1992. The development and intensification of cooperation was a natural and logical consequence of these early days of 1990s. Then we have environmental protection, the second area. And I think that environmental protection was the first area where the warming of relations during the Cold War was noticeable, because all the Baltic states could and joined actually, because this area was relatively least burdened with political divisions. And despite difficulties on the part of the former Soviet Union, the states of the Baltic Sea region made some timid attempts to establish contacts outside the blocs during the Cold War. The Helsinki Commission, HELCOM, is a great example of such let's say, inter-bloc activity, inter-bloc cooperation. I think that that simply the countries of the region realized that environmental protection is difficult to control by some legal regulations. Let's say, it's transnational, regional cooperation, and other international activities in the face of the cross-border nature of problems related to environmental protection, like eutrophication, like need to protect biodiversity, and so on, were simply necessary for effective implementation of different activities. Then environmental protection was perceived as an important area for international cooperation, thanks to multilateral conferences, like Conference of Prime Ministers of the Baltic Sea region in Ronneby in September 1990. Then we have Baltic Sea States Conference in Copenhagen in March 1992, during which the CBSS was established. So it was also, let's say, supported by top level, by high level of politicians of states belonging to the Baltic Sea region. And finally, I think that the last issue was related to some kind of transformation, and I think that we know that this international order was fundamentally changed as a result of events that followed 1989 in Central and Eastern Europe and the Baltic Sea region, which we know as the Autumn of Nations. And the situation east of the Hamburg-Trieste line is quite well illustrated by the fact that there are probably few examples in the history that one country, for example, Poland, changed all its neighbors on its borders within such small period of time. And their number increased from 3 to 7. In fact, this doesn't only apply to Poland itself, but also to the neighboring countries. And all these new countries, especially Baltic states, but as well as Poland, need, let's say, a help from well-developed Nordic states, help related to transformation, and help leading to transformation in social, economic transformation, social transformation, and so on. And at the end, let's say of this first answer, I'd like to stress that the structure of the international order in the Baltic Sea region after the end of the Cold War developed in two ways. On the northwest coast of the Baltic Sea, the international order was shaped by the process of continuation and continuity of the existence of elements of the old order and their gradual adaptation to changing parameters of international environment. On the southeastern coast, on the other hand, the international order, similarly to Central and Eastern Europe, was shaped by rejecting elements of the old order and shaping new solutions or joining simply Western European structures. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Damian Szacawa. This was really a very helpful explanation of how you see the development of the last 30 years in institutional terms. And we will, of course, follow up your presentation later with some questions. At this moment, I would really like to pass the word on to Dr. Aleksandra Borowicz and hear her thoughts on this aspect of economic cooperation between the three Baltic states and Poland as an example of these kind of new forms of cooperation which sprung out in the early 90s and have existed and maybe to some extent accelerated by the common joining to the EU and the NATO. So the floor is yours, Aleksandra.
Thank you very much. I don't have very good news for the beginning because I'm very realistic actually to the case that I touched in my article, to the economic issues in selected Baltic states like Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, and Poland. And I think that there is not enough cooperation between those countries, but it's also well known that we are more differentiated, that united actually, because we differ much in these terms. I remember that when I started working on this paper, I also asked my maybe more experienced colleagues in econometric aspects also, what do they think about this direction of the research? And they said, oh, you touch very difficult aspect, because there are different countries in social and economic terms, not only in political. So even if we talk on about Baltic Sea region generally, we have so much different countries within this group. We have Finland, we have Sweden, we have this South countries, let's say new members of the EU, but also countries which sometimes are involved in, for example, EU Baltic Sea region strategy, but they are not members of the EU. So there are a lot of dimensions in which we differ. So in my opinion, the last 30 years was devoted on very individual economic development. So it was all about development in business and in trade. Even if I take a look on some data devoted to trade or foreign direct investment, you can see that with the EU accession, there was a slow movement of those streams where the capital and trade was conducted and still is to the Western countries. So in my opinion, the economic aspects are still have some spare margin to be developed, and this is one of the key challenges. Of course, I also observe in the Baltic Sea region there is a, I think Mr. Szacawa already mentioned this cooperation within the Baltic Sea region. It's in the area of transport, actually, and those aspects connected with the environment, which is not a very characteristic feature to my faculty. But for example, the Faculty of Geography at the University of Gdańsk is strongly devoted to those aspects, and they are very active in those areas. So that's why I know that they also conduct the projects, and this is the part of the interest. So I think that there is a lot of space to create some value added from this cooperation, and unfortunately, in strictly economic terms, we are more diverse than we have common features that we can share, even taking into consideration the level of or the phase where the countries are within the investment development path. We differ so much that is even difficult to define what will be the next step, but maybe later on we will go into details more updated and more closer to our times. So thank you for now.
Thank you very much, Aleksandra. If I may, I address you with the first name on the first name basis. Excuse me for my informality, but this is really a very interesting insight, and I'm really looking forward to follow up that later asking when I will ask some questions to you. But I shall pass the word now to Louis Vierenga and let you speak about the theme that you are really passionately investigating, these ideas of cooperation that are very popular among certain parties in the region, especially the idea of intermarium and the foreign policy ideas of radical right. The floor is yours, Louis.
Yes, thank you, Peteris, and thank you to both Peteris and Aleksandra for extending this very generous invitation for me to be on this panel. It's a pleasure to be here remotely speaking to you from actually a transnational institution, not just through the Baltics, but through the Atlantic community, as I recently started a new position at the Baltic Defense College. So perhaps it's fitting that I'm talking about foreign policy, kind of merging two research interests. One of the things that strikes me is, yes, as was pointed out, I do research populist radical right parties, but I have gone more narrow in my field. So I'm looking at party structure. I'm not so much focused on elections and percentages. I take more of an interpretivist approach. And what has really struck me over these last couple of years when I started doing field work, interviews, content analysis of documents, literature published, social media, for example, is the difference between the actual party in terms of, let's say, more conventional suit and tie politics, and then this sort of newer phenomenon with young people, actually. Not all of them, but a lot of them, especially in the region, take a more meta-political approach to politics. They really are of the worldview and the mindset that culture is downwind from politics, and that in order to change, and this is a very traditionally left-wing approach, in order to change politics, you must change culture. And in order to do that, you must change not what is said, but how, well, what is said certainly, but how that is said. Nonetheless, as we look at the ruling party in Poland right now, Law and Justice's debacle with the EU, and the sort of questions about will they be separated from the EU's legal system? Are we witnessing an immovable object and an unstoppable force in terms of what the Commission can do? One of the things that I think has become really evident for a long time with Poland and Hungary, but also with the Czech Republic and their coalition forming in light of the recent elections, Prime Minister Babiš and Viktor Orban, a reoccurring character, is that there's transnationalism on the party level as well, to some degree, that I think the radical right in Western Europe has not really seen. Quite simply because the Overton window has been expanded, and as Kasimura has correctly pointed out, during the last half of the previous decade, the far right has been mainstreamed. And so you can have parties like ANO or people like Andrej Babiš really promoting this kind of illiberal populism, taking, if not a couple of pages, but the whole playbook from the radical right, much like Orban has done and Law and Justice has done in light of like numerous smaller and more fragmented right. The one question that has really predominated my research has been asked by Michael Minkenberg in 2017 when he asks if there's been a lasting democratic consolidation after the Big Bang enlargement in 2004. If democracy had actually been achieved, or was it sort of a Potemkin village, and are we seeing actually democratic backsliding, or was it not there? And that's not necessarily the narrow focus of my research, but that was a point that I wanted to bring up for a more broader discussion today in light of this kind of, from the collapse of the Soviet Union to onward, because I think there's no real easy answer. And if opposition forces win in Poland, if opposition forces win in Hungary, and if, you know, even if the Peter Fiala's pro-Western coalition forms a government in the Czech Republic, that's largely seen as, okay, maybe a pivot away from China and the Russian Federation, but still a sort of a gift to Law and Justice, because the transnational aspect really means that these figures would need each other and they rely on each other. But what I focus on is more almost behind the scenes, not quite behind the scenes, because some of the gimmicks, which are done on purpose to attract news attention, like, you know, flashing the okay hands signal and these types of things, using memes in politics, it has helped the Conservative People's Party of Estonia's youth organization gain either notoriety or fame, depending on how you look at the cleavage. And actually, this was one of the most popular parties in Estonia prior to the municipal election. Didn't actually turn out that way, but they were polling quite well up until really the eve of the election. And so I have focused a lot on political ideas. No, I'm not a political theorist. My approach to this is very much coming from the interpretivist tradition and using a qualitative content analysis to explore what meanings of ideology and what meanings behind rhetoric lie in, I think, a region where nationalism means something slightly different, where it's less taboo, and the sort of blurred lines between patriotism and nationalism are acceptable in ways that may not be in countries like Sweden or Germany or Canada, for example. The US, of course, a different story. And that largely has to do with history, with the experience of state socialism. Now, I come from the US, so neither my parents, or my grandparents lived through this, so I can't speak as an individual who's been directly touched by this. I'm speaking as a researcher, and I believe in a certain degree of researcher reflexivity. So I have been immersed in the region for some time. And speaking on a panel with Ukrainians or Poles, for example, I always find that Intermarium brings out a really good discussion. Now, Intermarium is not the same as Piłsudski's kind of region against the German East politic and a more Eurasianism, nor is it even to do with Andrzej Duda's 3 Cs initiative. Rather, the Intermarium that I'm speaking about does involve transnationalism, and it is actually influenced by an ethno-political foreign policy outlook. I'm oftentimes asked when I present about this, some people find it to be fascinating / alarming that such ultranationalist forces could gain a foothold, and then some people find it to be really overblown or overstated. I'm not making a prediction about whether or not this metapolitical form of entryism will in fact fundamentally shape politics over time. That remains to be seen. I actually will not, and I have not in my work or my public speaking make long-term predictions. Rather, I just know that the actors that I study are playing very much the long game. They realize that their objectives cannot be achieved overnight, and they realize that in order to change the narrative, to change the political landscape, this requires changing the way that things are talked about. But it is very much in line with the goal of the overall radical right, which is to pull the mainstream competitors to the right, so that every party needs to react either. And in the region, Michael Minkenberg has done extensive research that when there is a radical right threat in Central and East Europe, the mainstream always reacts in favor of the radical right in terms of adopting their strategy. This does not happen in Western Europe, which is why you see cordons sanitaires in Belgium and Sweden and in Germany that you do not see to the same extent in Latvia or even in Estonia. I actually thought that there may be one against EKRE, but they were invited into the coalition by the Center Party in 2019. They're now in opposition, and they've consolidated quite well. So what Intermarium sees is they see nation states being the most important form of ideological expression of the titular nation state. So they are philosophically against any type of egalitarianism. And they do believe in blood and soil nationalism, that the citizens are only jus sanguinis citizens. And that the agenda should never end at the border. So, this idea of, Estonia first or Latvia first or Ukraine first, it doesn't end at the border for these actors. They very much believe in transnationalism because they have this kind of view of Europe they put forward. And that view is that the last bastion of the natural, traditional Europe lies within the Baltic states and the Intermarium region between the Adriatic, the Black, and the Baltic Sea. And it's the point that is made, very interestingly enough, that they notice that the experience of occupation in the Baltic states, or state socialism when we apply it to the rest of the region that was under the Iron Curtain, is that it protected them, in their words, not mine, from another more nefarious form of Marxism, which is cultural Marxism. So you do have the right in Poland, let's say Law and Justice, which is a reformed party, and in Latvia, and to a certain extent Estonia, there have been a little bit more verbal flirtations with the type of Eurosceptic discourse than in Latvia, I think. But you have this kind of hesitancy to turn east and look at Eurasianism and Vladimir Putin as an ideological or a politically relevant alternative, simply because of the experience. Not that it wouldn't fly in a body politic, but I think to be a nationalist in this region means you must be against any form of strong Russian foreign policy. But the problem there for these metapolitical actors that usually attach themselves to a movement or a party, and now I should say a lot of them do not act on behalf of their party. They're there as individuals. They just happen to belong to a party because it is easier to use some form of entryism to attach yourself to an existing party than it is to start afresh, because you have the infrastructure, you have some degree of legitimacy or credibility. And that's not to say that the parties are not polarizing. It depends on the country and the political system, but it is easier than starting their own from scratch. And that is the better way to implement political change. And so they very much see a new Europe as this idea of intermarium, and they have this ethno-futurist, which is borrowed from Guillaume Fay's archaeofuturism, which sort of combines this importance of realizing a past of a people, real or perceived, the traditions, the language, the mythic ethos, and then combining this with futuristic technologies, social media, for example. Use of social media is important, and this is how transnationalism occurs, especially in light of the lockdown, as traveling is just now arguably starting to return in some instances to normal. And so this is the foreign policy outlook that is not perceived by the parties at large, by a small segment of individuals that are more aligned together than they are with their parties. And the question that I'm now looking at in my research is how much ideological influence do these people have over the mother party? And the answer is different. And I think Estonia is a bit different of an outlier case study than it is, because the organization Sinine Ratus, which is Blue Awakening in Estonian, has a large degree of autonomy from the mother party. And they have essentially been able to say or do as they please. And along the way, they have attracted young people, because what are young people like? I mean, that's a very wide question, but young people experience social media different than even my age. I'm a millennial. And, you know, I remember when Facebook came out, I remember MySpace. Well, now there's Instagram, there's TikTok, there's Telegram, there's everything. And so Twitter, having a wide reach and keeping a style that is relatable to young people, which meme culture does, which music does, and which, you know, highlighting historical traditions also does, is a way to sort of win, or at least get a head start on winning the culture war. And so the last thing that I will end on is publishing houses and online print or media, online news sources, where like Remix in the Visegrad, which is published in English, and I don't think is a youth organization. They have a fairly wide conservative outreach that is sort of what you would expect if Fidesz, Law and Justice, and well, Fidesz and Law and Justice got together and had their own publishing house that merged with Fox News. It would be something like Remix. And with the metapolitical youth organizations, they tend to have a little bit more of an edgy way of talking about culture, which merges news, merges history, historical understanding of ethnicities in the region with meme culture. So I'll end on that, and I would be happy to continue the discussion with my colleagues. Thanks everyone for your attention.
Thank you, Louis. It's a very much different view on regional cooperation than the more mainstream regional cooperation that all our colleagues before you spoke, but it's nonetheless very relevant and very interesting in my view. I have written some comments on each of the presentations that you have given, and my plan is as follows: that I will pose 1 or 2 questions to each of you, and let the floor basically be open for also your own interaction between you. I thought that we could maybe quickly go through those questions that I have. Maybe you cannot really address them because probably I ask questions that are out of bounds of what you have written, but maybe you can look, so to speak, in a broader perspective from the trends that you have observed in your academic work in general. So my question to Dr. Szacawa, what about the situations when liberal institutionalism, as embodied by CBSS, meets realism? So such situations as occurred in 2014 and also since then, namely when Russia basically, a member of CBSS, behaves in a way that is not seen as acceptable by the rest of member states of CBSS. Would you say still that CBSS serve its purpose of regional cooperation when there are such countries with so diverse views on how international relations should be conducted? And if you could give some kind of view of the situation as it stands now, what are the main avenues of, so to speak, of cooperation? What are the main subjects within this institutional framework? And I know that Aleksandra Kuczyńska-Zonik is going to ask later your questions about threats and opportunities, but I thought that we could stay maybe in this particular stage when we try to basically look at the situation as it is now. So these 2 questions to you, Damian, and then thank you very much, Dr. Aleksandra Borowicz. Very interesting view, not very rosy indeed, about the probably not that developed cooperation in economic affairs between Poland and Baltic states. But it really begs the question, in my view, why it is the case that there is so little cooperation between these 4 countries in economic affairs, because it is at least my impression that when it comes to political affairs, there are huge interactions between Poland and the Baltic states. Migration is just one example where I've seen that 3 Baltic states takes its cues from Poland as somewhat of a regional leader, if you like. So also to you, the question is, what are the main areas of cooperation so far? And if you can give us some kind of a future assessment, what would be your scenario? What would be your assessment in future? Are there any kind of possible avenues of cooperation in economic affairs that have not been dealt with so far? So, and then lastly, thank you very much, Louis, for your contribution. It's been really most illuminating, and although you have been really very kind of modest in your assessment that this is something that takes place among individuals, this kind of discussions about these projects, alternative projects of regional cooperation, I'm still extremely interested about this idea of intermarium as metapolitical project. It seems to me that it is some kind of idea of a new moral block between morally corrupt, degenerate West, if we use this terminology of those theorists, and this really foreign Eurasianist culture of Russia, civilization of Russia. And how come that there is this this kind of this kind of vision, if you like, of Eastern Europe being this moral bloc? What is the, so to speak, the material base for such ideas? And what is their point of reference? Is it really the interwar period? Because for me, the interwar period and Eastern Europe, Eastern and Central Europe, it was pretty messy period with quite a lot of geopolitical ambitions and interests which clashed with each other and prevented also a development of a sound security policy that could protect against the German ambitions on one hand, but also Soviet ambitions on the other hand. So yeah, I'm just curious about these two matters. And then also, if you have time also, it is my interest also that to understand why in the present situation, there are quite a lot of populist radical parties in almost all countries of the Baltic Sea region, Finland, Sweden, the 3 Baltic states, well, except Lithuania, where you do not find really such a populist radical right party. Germany, have I missed some country? Denmark. But how come that these ideas circulate in small circles, and why haven't they become more popular, more interesting to these political parties? Is it because they feel that they are still somehow on the fringe, so to speak, these fringe ideas, and which would not be acceptable to the political mainstream? I give the floor to that person who is really ready to answer. Is it Damian? Would you like to begin?
Yeah, so probably it will be the best. And you asked me 2 questions, Peteris, but well, I have some problems related with my internet, so I don't hear properly the first one. But is it the question related to the CBSS, and is the CBSS is still able to serve its purposes? Please unmute yourself.
Sorry, yeah, exactly. Exactly. I was really curious about this situation when in liberal institutionalism, which I totally agree with you, CBSS in a way embodies, meets this kind of situations when you see that there is a totally new situation, when realist situation, if you like, when there is a huge power that behaves in a way that is not compatible with the values of these member states, of the other member states of the CBSS. And I wonder about the potential of CBSS. Can it really serve its purpose? Has it served its purpose? And how you assess its basically functionality, if you like.
Okay, thanks. So now it's more clear for me. So there is a very short and a longer answer to your question. First is yes. so that's end. And I think that the CBSS is still able to serve its purposes, and I think that we have to remember, let's say, at least one reservation. The CBSS was not established to deal with, with all these military hard security issues. From the beginning, all these issues related to war, to conflicts, hard security, and so on, were outside of the CBSS. And the main aim of the CBSS was to be simply a forum for political consultations over regional issues, which are very important for the region. So this is first point. The second point is that so far, and I think that there won't be, any agreement, any acknowledgement that the Russia is doing on a let's say right way. I think that it's clear from all Baltic states, from Nordic states, 3 Baltic states, Poland and Germany, that the situation after Crimea, after let's say this war in eastern Ukraine, is not acceptable. Taking into account, you know, the importance of international law for Nordic states, which are small states and which based, let's say, their foreign and security policy within strong international organizations and international law generally. So this is the second point. But I think that we know that we need some kind of, let's say, fuse. We need to discuss all regional issues related to safe and secure region, for example, related to environmental protection, related to transport, for example, related to prosperous region, together in, you know, in a group of states which belong to the whole Baltic Sea region. And it's we have, you know, and this is the added value of the CBSS. We have a lot of international institutions, different international settings that are, let's say, exclude Russia, that we could, for example, talk to each other using European Union, sometimes using NATO or something like that. But it was last week when Russia decided to cut, let's say, its let's say, mission to NATO. And today we need, let's say, Russia on board to deal with all important issues. There is no, let's say, acceptance. There is no possibility in the foreseeable future, for example, to organize a meeting at the top level. Yeah, you know, and between, for example, prime minister, to organize something like a Baltic Sea summit. But I think that there could be, let's say, in the future, because still there are a lot of, there are plenty of challenges, let's say, regarding, for example, good status, environmental status of the Baltic Sea. We see that, you know, even despite this Baltic Sea Action Plan that was agreed in 2007 by the HELCOM, we know that that the environmental status of the Baltic Sea is far away from being healthy, simply. And what are the main avenues of cooperation? So I think that it's, as I said, if we have Russia on board, and in case of CBSS, we have Russian representative on board, and very often this pragmatic cooperation is based on, let's say, informal contacts between not not political representatives, not ministers of foreign affairs, but on the lower level. There are some experts who meets every 2 or 3 months. There is a lot of, let's say, direct cooperation related, for example, to anti-trafficking, in trafficking measures, let's say, taken to fight with organized crime, children at risk, safe and secure region. I've been civil protection network, or all these issues connected with sustainability and the place of sustainability in culture, in tourism. And this is maybe not, all these issues are not related to whole Russia, but to its northwestern part, which is, I don't know if you hear me still. Yeah, so this is not, let's say, these are not issues related to whole Russia, because it's simply too big for the Baltic Sea region. But at least for the northwestern part, with St. Petersburg, with Pskov, so some kind of cultural cooperation and so on, they are also very, very important. And yes, and to sum up, I see still a huge potential, even taken into account that we have still unresolved problem related to chemical munition, for example. And this could be, you know, this is right now some kind of hot potato in the Baltic Sea region. Everyone, let's say, understands that this is a key topic, that this is a huge problem, and no one is able, let's say, to take responsibility, own responsibility to resolve this problem. This is a clearly multilateral problem, and I think that this is something related, you know, to commons. We have to find a common solution to this problem, to this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Damian. That was really a very interesting answer and really very, I would say, very optimistic indeed as well. Now let's turn to a more pragmatic speaker at this panel. Excuse me, no pun intended, really. What would you say, Aleksandra Borowicz? What is your assessment of this more bread and butter issues of economic cooperation?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm listening all the time with all the things that you say in this political issues. And I think that even you hear what you say as an expertise, that you mention more or less the political aspect, like migration, foreign policy, military aspects, because of the geography that we are all together at the Baltic Sea region. But what united the Baltic Sea region is the first point that also Damian mentioned, is the Baltic Sea. And the second issue is European Union. So the economic issues, so this realism that we talk about. The other aspect is that that I already mentioned, that there was some kind of border made between the countries of BSR in the form of membership in monetary union and staying behind. And it influences very strongly the some kind of long-term aims of the countries in the region, and it results, of course, the problems with this close cooperation and development of this cooperation. This is natural for European countries to cooperate in economic terms with the closest neighbors. But still, for example, in case of Poland, mainly we look in the direction of the members of the old EU 15, let's say. Okay, so this is the basics. So sometimes we are lacking of the strong cooperation in economic terms in this region. However, for example, countries like Sweden, like Finland, Denmark, are the very good examples of this huge step that can be taken in the direction of economic development in the area of innovation, business development, creation of the favorable conditions. So this is still a part that can be discussed on the platform which Baltic Sea region creates, like Damian mentioned. That this is the kind of our thinking about the cooperation in the region should look alike. So just the intergovernmental somehow cooperation, so very open discussion, exchange of the good practice, and making some kind of opinions. And as a result, in the long term, then on this basis, we can go into detailed cooperation, maybe not on the platform which covers all the Baltic Sea states, but for example, in 3 countries, 4 countries. So it would be much easier to develop this cooperation. You pointed also very difficult aspects, like the current situation on the eastern border in terms of migration, but still we are touching the problem of the political aspect, the attitude of the EU as a whole in this area. Are we left with this situation, or there is a strong voice of EU which stands behind Poland and Lithuania in this area? Sometimes we also need in this cooperation some kind of strong voice. What Luis mentioned, what just it came up to my mind, that we are trying to make some kind of romance, if I understood correctly, with this direction of Eurasia. And this is something what really not maybe scares me, but it's something that's strictly strange for me, because in this economic aspect, we do not see this potential in trade or foreign direct investment. In European Union, we try to be more realistic towards third countries' investments. That's why we have FDI screening mechanism in the European Union. So we try to cover this and to go into deepen regional integration in economics. And sometimes this new strand of political thinking between parties, but also in societies, what Luis mentions, is something new that we observe. And I don't know if it can be some kind of threat, or it's just the moment that we are facing nowadays and looking for something new. But still, a very good point that you made, that it's all about the history which is rooted in our minds, also in the generations a little bit maybe older than we are here, because for us it's some kind of strange thinking about looking on the East. But still, in this political terms, this direction is obvious. You asked me, Peteris, about the future of economic development. I think what will keep us together in Baltic Sea region, it will be the sustainable development, and those aspects, not only in terms of maybe climate change and this aspect as a horizontal dimension of this cooperation, but those things that are close for us, all the countries in the region, like for example, development of the industry in the direction of the concept of 4.0 industry, the innovation, the cluster cooperation, which is still the best examples are from Denmark, from Sweden, from Finland, and we are still trying to develop this. I also talk about this in Poland. So this is the area in which we think I think we should go into detailed, into deepen cooperation. Of course, remembering about the fact that if we find some dimensions that we can cooperate deeply in economic terms, it will also result in political terms, because it will be easier on the basis of those indirect discussions like Damian mentioned. It will bring the value added. It will be much easier to create a compromise or an agreement between those countries. So we can treat this economic dimension as a more practical aspect, as a tool of further political cooperation on higher level. So that's the thing that what I wanted to, what came up to my mind on the basis of what you said in your presentations. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks, Alexandra. Louis, would you like to go on?
Yeah, I think that, you know, if we look at Ukrainian actors, Polish actors, and actors of the Baltic states, you'll find a little bit of a difference. Of course, Russia and the experience with the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation today does play a very large role. However, that's not the only reason. There is very much esoteric, almost philosophical understanding of nationalism that I think transcends anything that most populist radical right parties have a demand side for. Former Jobbik chairman Vona Gabor was also deeply philosophically very well read, very philosophical, knew his history, and it was really focused on this pan-Turanism, this sort of mythical origin of the Magyar nation. And there was no, Jobbik is the second biggest party in Hungary, was for a while anyway, after Fidesz, but there was no real demand side for that. That doesn't mean that there's no demand side for issues regarding national minorities, regarding immigration, borders, a strong socio-cultural value in the face of Western liberalism, be it from elites in Brussels, Washington, D.C., or national capitals that are seen as kind of the winners of the transition and the winners of globalization and the media, political, banking elites. But I think we could also trace this back to the notion, and especially this is fitting for the theme of this webinar, from the Soviet Union to new forms of cooperation. But if we even go back further in time, prior to the illegal occupation of the Baltic states by the Soviet Union, we will see the national awakenings, both in Latvia and in Estonia. And the understanding of this by nationalists in the Baltic Sea region is primarily through the need for another national awakening. First, there was the national awakening against the Germans, the Russian Empire, and then this idea of statehood and song festivals and flags. What defines a people? When did Estonians start calling themselves Estonian? And I think it's seen as an unfinished national awakening, because the point that is made is that after the Soviet Union collapsed, geostrategically, the Baltic states, of course, looked to the West for the security guarantee, which was widely popular and much needed. I think there's a general consensus even amongst ultra-nationalists in the region that this is much needed at the time. Although if you ask them, they will look to actually Poland to be the economic and military stalwart of the Intermarium project that they perceive, as well as Ukraine. But Poland is kind of seen as the economic and military powerhouse in their geostrategic idea of future in terms of defense. But basically, they feel that the nationalism was driven by the sense of occupation. So nationalism is understood in this region differently than in Western Europe and the US, especially if we just leave it to the US, because I would argue nationalism is understood differently there anyway. And the main idea is that a further national awakening is needed, because when the Iron Curtain fell and when re-independence was gained, then people started driving Western cars, they started listening to Western music, going to the cinema, and this idea of kind of Western degeneracy that goes along with the modern man, and they do say the modern man, not the person, really distorts the idea of what Julius Evola type nationalism really means. And so, Peteris, when you ask why, what the material base is here, I don't necessarily think that there's a demand side in terms of what voters look for. I don't think that there's a large need or thirst for this type of nationalism. I think that there is a niche, and you correctly pointed out, almost all countries in Europe have a populist radical right party that gets between, let's say, 12 to 18 or 11%. The AfD lost a couple of seats, so did dawn of direct democracy in the Czech Republic. But that niche is very much there, and I would make a bold prediction that in Lithuania we will see either a functional equivalent or a populist radical right party emerge in light of the new refugee crisis that is due to Lukashenko's nonlinear warfare against the region, as well as the US pullout from Afghanistan. But I think that really there's the niche and the kind of reason why people vote for populist radical right parties does not align perfectly with the metapolitical philosophy. Rather, I think it's driven by people who are even further in a different niche of their own party or movement that is trying to use a form of entryism to normalize and mainstream their discourse. And I think the point is that in the Baltic states, and I don't know how much this is with NIO, because I think that that's very individually led. People like Raiviseltits is not the same as the youth organization, but in Estonia, it is. It's very uniformed in terms of their outlook. It is the understanding of the tradition of a national awakening from a very small nation that has always faced occupiers. And I think that understanding, that's how I understand this form of nationalism in the region. And then your last question about, if you could just clarify that for me, you were asking why radical right parties are in almost every country and how they circulate in these. What was your final question?
Well, I was just basically wondering, why haven't we seen more people really, why there is not more cooperation between these parties, and these, why this idea of intermarium is, as you say, still among some segment of elite, why it has not spread into much larger segments of population. But you kind of answered that already with your reference to the general population, that there is indeed voters who are interested in this kind of rhetoric, but they are not really into this kind of geopolitical visions.
Well, I would also tack on that just the generational gap. I mean, I can't think of anybody that's over early 30s that is known to me by name in my research. And so some of them are elected to high positions and have a high profile in their circles. But I don't think that necessarily translates into, political clout the same way that people in Generation Z and of course the baby boomer generation enjoy. And so I think that what they're trying to do when they play the long game is sort of prop up nationalism within the so-called culture wars that all of the world is experiencing. I mean, radical right organizations in the Baltics had something to say about Black Lives Matter protests after the George Floyd incident in 2020, whereas previously that didn't. Why? Because young people watch YouTube and TikTok. So these global themes are connected. And so I think that, the way that they play their strategic approach to social media and communication strategies is very much in line of getting the message out there to their generation, because fairly soon baby boomers will not be the apex political generation. It'll be Gen Z and millennials, and then they'll kind of go up the ladder. So I think they're hoping to have their own Sebastian Kurz style, let's say, entryism of politics, and that's what that's why I think that it is. I think it's really a generational aspect as well.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, all three of you. Alexandra, Alexandra, would you like to take over from here on, or?
Yeah, I would like to ask the question about the opportunities and challenges, because it was my aim to ask you, but I feel that several issues were discussed. I mean, some of you answered the question or touched the issue of challenges, but I would like to maybe once more ask you for that. I mean, to summarize some issue, because we have got some minutes left, so it is time for all of you to say some words. But so that's why I would like to ask you once more about this question. I mean, what do you feel? How could you name maybe the most important challenge or risk for further Baltic Sea regional cooperation, or maybe more broader Central European cooperation, and the role of Baltic Sea region in that specific field. I'm asking particulars about security. Obviously, it depends of the authority, of state authority, political elite, what can be named as security, or what is security, because we have been observing more and more issues which maybe a challenge for particular states or regional cooperation. I'm thinking about political actors such as Russia, China, which is growing. The potential of China is growing in the region. I'm thinking about energy transformation and several different energy threats, such as transformation to a green economy. So maybe this question will be addressed to Aleksandra, if you could say some words. I mean, the role of economy transformation in context of energy. Or we have, of course, we've got question about the COVID situation. We know now it is Latvia where the number of COVID cases are the largest in the European Union. So it is, in my opinion, the question how economy and society could solve out the problem of transition or the development of economy after COVID pandemic. So I feel, of course, there are questions about the growing role of nationalism and populism, which Louis covered this issue. So once more, I would all of you ask about the challenge or the risk or threat for region in a very broad perspective. You can answer, or you can answer the particular threat which I mentioned, or maybe you can mention other risk, other threat you feel is the more important. So I would like to start maybe from Louis.
Yes, thank you, Aleksandra. You know, it's a really good question, and I think it's because I think it really allows us to assess this kind of Baltic identity that's former Estonian President Toomas Hendrik Ilves brought up when he was, I believe, in the European Parliament or foreign minister, but it was before he was president as well. Is there a Baltic identity more so than historical experiences? Now, I don't want to revisit that question, but I do feel that the three Baltic states are very unified in their approach, and that they are a different region than the Visegrad right now in terms of being members of the larger club of the European bloc and of the Transatlantic Alliance. And I see even in the far right in Latvia, through my own research with coding documents, they have a much softer anti-establishment outside of Latvia, that is, stance. But I think with Latvia, I worry a lot about political fragmentation and an unstable political cleavage system, and in parallel, COVID identity or vaccine identity. I think that a lot of the sort of American dystopian nightmares about parallel societies are not quite there in Latvia yet. But as you correctly pointed out, Aleksandra, yes, Latvia has the worst numbers in Europe right now, and they are the first country to go back on lockdown, a strict lockdown with a curfew after a vaccine rollout. And that is largely because of vaccine hesitancy, which has developed along political cleavages and is being politicized by a populist, Aldous Globzians, who was formerly a part of this party, KPVLV, was kicked out or left, I don't know, and I think kicked out, and with the other founder of the party, Artis Kaimic, and started his own party, Law and Order, and is actively leading the anti-vax and anti-COVID passport charge, which has led to a lot of protests in the street. He has a significant social media platform and following. And if mobilized to vote, I think they'll get enough seats to reshuffle the cleavage structure. And I don't know if we're at the point where that will switch with Harmony Center, Sashkanya, but I don't think that he would rule out coalitioning with Harmony Center, which has always been the biggest vote getter. So the kind of political mainstream in Latvia is, the party of Prime Minister Kariņš, Vienotība, Unity, is not polling so well. Good news is PAR, the sort of pro-European party, is polling very well. But with the cleavage structure being as is, this, I think, could very well, if not managed with precise caution, could lead to fragmentation. Now, in Estonia, that's not to say that there are not. There was just a large vaccine passport protest in Tallinn last weekend. However, the political situation here, despite the high COVID numbers, I think is relatively stable. I think that a unified approach to China, especially with the Lithuanians leading the charge, is evident, and certainly a unified approach to the Russian Federation is evident. So I don't see any Hungarian or Polish style approach from any members of the Baltic Sea region. However, the one question, and I would pose this to my colleagues on the panel, that I'm curious about is, just because there is a unified front to China, that doesn't mean that investment is not taking place, and how do the Baltic states really communicate to the People's Republic of China that investment does not mean political favors, and is that even possible today? Because that is sort of a gap in my knowledge, but I think it's one aspect that scholars and policymakers paying attention to the Baltic states should start focusing on.
Yeah, thank you. So, I think that you mentioned a very good point, a very important point in our discussion. I mean, communication strategies between the state and society, because you discussing vaccination process, it's very important to see the relation between the effectiveness of communication and the number of those who are vaccinated. And the same problem, probably the same problem is with the China, of course, with Russia. So I feel that it's a huge problem, maybe the issue for our next discussion. So let's go back to my question about challenge for future development, and I would like to ask Aleksandra about that. I mean, if you could answer, do you see any potential for cooperation in the context of recovery from our current economic situation, I mean, in context of COVID, or do you feel that it depends on each state? I mean, is it better to cooperate, or it depends on individual approach of the country in the Baltic Sea region? Aleksandra.
It's always better to cooperate. So that's the main point. It's always better to cooperate. I always say to my students that all the cooperation, all the processes of integration are based on the assumption that 2 + 2 is more than 4. So it always brings value added, and it is based on the political, of course, decision, but still if the politicians would not be aware of the fact that it will bring value added, they would not decide on the process of integration or any cooperation. So that's the main thing. When Aleksandra, you asked about the security, I made a short picture, wrote on my papers here, write down, because I wanted to touch the two issues that you proposed also, the building and modernization of the economy in the direction of the green economy, and also the building or rebuilding the economy after the pandemic, which is taking place, of course, already. So first, the green economy, it is one of the pillars that should be as a key point of the cooperation of the Baltic Sea region, because of the neutral potential that Baltic Sea brings. So this is one of the issues that can be touched on the level of BSR strategy. And in this context, we should be aware of this, that European Union is the author of many technologies, and probably the future will lead us to think about this, that European companies will create technology, will conduct the research and development works in EU, of course, also in BSR. And the pandemic, which is already discussed in the letter, is it a black swan or it is not, on the basis on different features, it is something new or it is not. So there is a huge discussion on this, but I still treat the pandemic outbreak as a black swan that changed the puzzles on the global scene, that it broke global linkages. And as a result, it can also bring opportunities and threats. On the side of the opportunities, also for our region that we are talking about today, I see that maybe the change in understanding of globalization will influence, for example, the relocation of foreign direct investments. So we will try to go into deeper integration on the area of European Union. And of course, and we know from the practice, but also from theory, that companies want to cooperate with the markets that they know, that have the proximity, not only in the physical terms, but also cultural, the knowledge of common language. So it makes much easier this cooperation. So it can be treated as an opportunity, and also working together in joint programs on the technologies devoted to the green economy, maybe may result in this value added from cooperation. But at the same time, we have to be aware that pandemic weakened our companies in European Union. And I remember that when European Union proposed this screening mechanism of FDI in 2018, and it went into force, I was actually amazed by this, that it happened, that European Commission went with this, came up with this idea and this kind of tool. So I was thinking about this moving back with the liberalization of the free movement of capital. But when the pandemic outbroke, it came to me that it will be some kind of the tool that it can help European the companies to not be the direction of investors from China, which very are influenced by the state capital, and they compete not on the equal rules with the European companies. So I think that this is another, from one side, threat that we can face in European Union. But from the other hand, it can be also a platform of a stronger cooperation in a better region that can lead us, for example, to from one point not being a direction of this, for example, mergers and acquisitions like companies from Sweden, Germany, which we know that it happened in 2016, starting generally from 2010, that was a huge dynamic in mergers and acquisitions in European Union in the most developed countries of EU. But we have to remember that countries like Poland, Lithuania, and Estonia, with this lacking asset of capital, are also a good starting point for penetration of Chinese capital, the internal market of the EU. Because we know that, of course, when you are engaged in one country, the capital can, in the free way, be transferred to all the other markets. So countries like Poland, maybe they do not, they are not considered as a final direction of this investment, but they can be a starting point for this penetration, for example, in the direction of Germany or Sweden or Finland, and those mergers and acquisitions. So there is a lot of those points that we can work together on, but we have to be aware of those two sides of a pandemic and trying to be as creative as possible to find the opportunities, because all the crises in economic terms bring the winners and the losers, and of course we want to be the winners. So one of the answers to that is just the stronger and deeper cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aleksandra. I think that it could be a great conclusion. I mean that we have to be a winner than loser and do the best as we can to be winners. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn to Damian and ask about the cooperation on the field of in the mission of institution, because I mean you said about potential of the cooperation within such institutions, but once more I would like to ask you about the effectiveness of the institution in time of pandemic, in time of this, you know, dynamic situation, particularly in context of Russia. I mean, my question is about how to deal with Russia, because you know that Russia is unpredictable partner. You said, of course, that it's not whole Russia, but only a part region. The neighborhood of our countries, but once more, how to cooperate with Russia, how to make it closer to European Union, to generally speaking Western civilization, to try to persuade Russia to cooperate closer.
Okay, yeah. Thank you, Aleksandra. I have again unfortunately some problem with internet connection. But first of all, I'd like to refer briefly to what Peteris said, that it was let's say very ideological and let's say not practical, but I think that
just optimistic.
Yeah, optimistic,
and doesn't have to mean anything else.
Okay, and I think that that this is one challenge, let's say, for whole international cooperation, simply to be visible and to be able to present added value. And I think that, well, in terms of the CBSS, we have so-called this two legs of this cooperation. I think the one is related to political dialogue and cooperation, which is quite difficult, taking into account what is going on in Eastern Europe and Russia's global politics. But the second one, which is connected to let's say pragmatic project related to direct cooperation, safe and secure region, prosperous region, to build a prosperous region, how to, let's say, involve Russia, Russian even civil society. I don't know if maybe you don't know. We talk a lot about, for example, civil societies, and there is a question related to NGOs in Russia, which often perceive, let's say, foreign support as a foreign agent, and this is, you know, quite. And this is amazing, you know, and this is very optimistic, because when I heard recently that, for example, money that Russian NGOs receive from the CBSS are not treated as a foreign money, because Russia participate on an equal level in the CBSS. So it means that if there is something like small, but anyone, there is something that there is a project support facility, and if any Russian NGOs want to, let's say, apply for this, this is this money which are paid from Stockholm or, for example, from SIDA are not perceived as a money from foreign agent. So this is one. Well, this is one of the reasons why I'm rather optimistic. But going back to Aleksandra's question about challenges, I think that there are plenty of challenges to international cooperation in the Baltic Sea region, and from my perspective, I very often use the concept of level of analysis, which allows me the right perspective and clear points. So firstly, on a global level, maybe this is nothing new, but we are faced with possibly huge change, I mean, transformation of international order. I started my today's speech about transformation of international order after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And today, I think that we are again in this formative moment. I guess that we could say that the cornerstone of this transformation is so-called Thucydides trap, in which China, as an emerging power, threatens to displace the United States as an existing great powers.
I'm afraid that we cannot hear Damian.
There is a common view in the region. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but there was some stop. But please continue.
Okay, so there is, I think that what I say that the Baltic Sea security is inherently connected with the Euro-Atlantic area, and despite some differences, there is a common view in the region between Nordic states, Baltic states, and Poland that the United States presence is key for a security. Okay, again, unstable connection.
I can hear you perfectly, so you can continue.
Oh, great. So I think that it's something connected with China and Huawei technology or something like that. So I think that we know that the United States presence is key for security and stability, as well as an effective deterrence of Russia. The growing United States presence in Southeast Asia means the growing risk that the US will gonna walk away from the Baltic Sea region and Northern Europe. I think that we understand quite well the United States position, and what we are trying right now is to persuade them not to doing it quickly. Simply, we need some time to prepare to this geostrategic change. Then secondly, on a regional level, there are another challenges. I talk a little bit about chemical munitions, about environmental protection, and I think that that this dumped chemical weapons, this is nothing new in terms of challenge for broadly understood regional security. But it is still unresolved challenge. Thanks to some international organizations like HELCOM, states in the Baltic Sea region are now aware of the problem. What we know is, let's say, we know where these bombs are located, at least. So what we are trying to do now is to decide what we should to do with them in the future. So what will be the best solution? And there is a question. There is no, let's say, clear answer taking into account Convention on Chemical Weapons, for example. Who is responsible for that? Who should pay for that? And how much it will cost? So all these, let's say, questions are still unanswered. We know also that that despite these common, let's say, efforts, we have also examples of the lack of political will in the Baltic Sea region. I think that it's quite important to stress that not everyone member states of the CBSS perceive the CBSS as the main regional organization. I think that it's quite obvious. We have, different other forums. You mentioned the European Union and EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region and so on and so on. For example, Lithuania, which holds the presidency in last year, after let's say summit of the CBSS, which they organized, there was nothing about this organization within the within Lithuanian press. So I think that some of you mentioned this communication problem. I think that proper communication is a challenge. All these forums of international cooperation need to be, let's say, visible, much more visible, because those who are involved in these practical networks usually knows very well that there is a added value of the CBSS taken from, for example, child and risk, civil protection network. There are great examples of inter-regional cooperation and using regional experience that we have in the Baltic Sea region, like Barnhouse project related to children at risk. And all these, let's say, all these processes now are now transferred thanks to the Council of Europe, thanks to the United Nations, and so on, outside of the Baltic Sea region. So these are examples of how regional cooperation could be, let's say, how the best practices, good practices, could be shared with other regions. And finally, you ask about COVID-19, and I think that we have another level, let's say, the individual level, which is also behind all these international organizations. I think that we often forget that that international organizations means also people. So if we want that any organization should be, let's say, should be more visible, should bring practical effect to the table, and so on, we need to, let's say, we need to send some more money for that. And in case of different intergovernmental cooperation, there is a question, there is a gap between, between what member states want, and they want added value, practical results, and so on. And on the other hand, there is they are not willing to pay for that. Or, for example, we have only annual budget, and let's say there is a question how to be more visible in all these, let's say, long-term processes if you have only annual budget, and if there is still a risk that there will be no organizational memory, for example, because people will move forward. If there are some problems related to COVID-19, that's all we, let's say, all we had. So there are different all these challenges are on different level. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Damian. I feel that we have got we've got a huge knowledge about I mean a percentage, but at the same time it's a quite huge knowledge about the cooperation within the region. On the one hand, I feel that is some kind of continuity from the Soviet Union from 90s till now. At the same time, due to the fact that we have got so many challenges and risk, there is some kind of adaptation to new reality. So that's why it's not only politics of independent individual states, but we have to cooperate and to solve out many problems on international or regional arena. So the problems are multidimensional, multilateral. That's why we talk about this regional institutions. Unfortunately, our time is left, so I would like to ask Peteris to make some concluding remarks or some to summarize our discussion.
Well, thank you very much, Aleksandra. This is a huge task to try to summarize something so different. And so really, as you said, Aleksandra, so many different things. What I can say is that I heard several themes that repeated throughout these presentations, these exchanges, these remarks. And first of all, let me say I heard that, yes, institutions are important for regional cooperation. They do exist. They have been created for a certain purpose, and they obviously, whether you are optimist or pessimist as me, they do function and they are there. And I was really very happy to hear that CBSS is not seen as a foreign agent in Russia. That really opens for more cooperation, at least, vis-a-vis civil society. This is my impression, at least. When it comes to economic affairs, I totally agree with Aleksandra that, yes, we can do much more, and there is a need for a clear leadership, as you put it, strong voice. And that there is interest also in this kind of sustainable development, in evolution of more of this kind of green economy in the Baltic Sea region. And in relation to this concept of green economy, it's really interesting that there are also links with Louis' theme, because believe it or not, green economy is one of the themes that has been taken up by the same parties that Louis is watching, studying, making research on. And I should also probably mention that, for instance, in Latvia, the national awakening in the late 1980s occurred in context of resistance against the Soviet regime's plans to build out industries that were environmentally not very friendly environmentally, to be honest. So that kicked off the nationalist movement in Latvia. And I wonder whether this kind of awakening, that civil society becomes active in some certain areas. And here I understand civil society pretty broadly, whether it be market actors like firms, foreign investors, or something like that, something else, or more like NGOs, or just popular initiatives. Maybe that is the really very key, this common realization that nature, environment, our health, COVID-19 as well, our welfare, and the sustainability of our societies are the values that unites us in Baltic Sea region. And on this note, I really would like to really end my presentation here, and thank you very much from my side for your very insightful observations. And please, Damian, do not take my remark about optimism or pessimism being as some kind of a critique. It just reflects that we all have different worldviews and different experiences. And thank you really very much, all of you. Thank you. Aleksandra, the floor is yours again.
Thank you very much. It's hardly add something to your remarks, because the as you said, topic is very broad and it's very difficult to sum up. But I would like to once more encourage you to look at our issue of the yearbook of the Institute of East Central Europe, because we, as a guest editor, collect so many papers which, in my opinion, cover several issues which we discussed today. So if you are interested to get into the issue more deeper, I think that the issue, the yearbook, will be the best choice, particularly because of the fact that some of the authors are among us now. So thank you once more for contributing. Thank you for assisting during the editing process, and I hope that it is only the introduction to the topic, and we have got more options, more opportunities to see, to hear you, and to even to meet maybe face to face. So thank you very much. Thank you, Peteris, for moderating, and have a nice thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Have a nice afternoon, and thank you again.